Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be getting started shortly. We are recording this session and live streaming on YouTube so that you can enjoy at a later time. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is the final day of Seedy Saturday, and we are so happy to have Victoria with us here today from Dundurn Castle. We'll be getting started shortly. In the meantime, let us know where you are tuning in from. We would love to know.
I know I suggested that, and then I realized I deleted the chat box so I could see everybody's faces, and now I can't find the chat box back.
Alyssa is looking forward to your talk today, Victoria. Jessica is tuning in from Dundas, Hamilton. Niagara Falls, coming from Niagara Falls, wonderful.
Ooh.
East Hamilton. Niagara Falls is gorgeous right now. It's completely like a winter wonderland. It's frozen.
Oh yeah? Amazing.
Hamilton, East Mountain, St. Catharines, downtown Hamilton, Oakville, downtown Hamilton.
I had assumed it would be a lot of Hamilton folks, but it's always exciting when you get people from other places as well.
Yeah, and just because Dundurn Castle is such a staple for us, right? Dundurn Castle, I mean, I feel like everyone in Hamilton knows about it.
You know what's surprising though is every now and then I'll run across a person who's lived in Hamilton their entire life. I'm like, oh yeah, I work at Dundurn Castle. And they're like, oh, what's that? It's like, oh.
Well, here, you have a few minutes. Let me tell you about it.
Yeah. It's very fun. I really enjoy putting on the interpreter voice of like, Dundurn Castle was built in 1832 for Sir Allan Napier McNabb. Like you actually jump into a slightly different voice of explaining to people.
For sure. I have multiple voices depending on who I'm speaking with and the scenario, right?
Yes. Oh, I'm talking to kids. Well, Dundurn Castle is a really big, cool house. It's got pillars that like you just put on different hats back and forth.
Yeah. Wonderful. Lennox, it's good to have you here today. He's tuning in from right besides Dundurn Park.
Yes.
We have Fiona from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Thank you for being here today. Alyssa in Hamilton, supporting fellow Dundurn staff.
Oh, I was wondering if that was our Alyssa.
There was another Alyssa. This is Alyssa G.
Yeah. And yes, Lennox, nice to have you here, even though I can't see you. I was actually just thinking when I was getting set up, I'm like, oh, I wonder if he'll be here because you're such a staple in the garden. So thanks for joining. And Patricia, you're one of the very first people to log in. So hi, nice to see your face. It has been a while since the McQuestion days. So thanks for coming.
We have Leanne.
Hi, Lennox.
We have Laura joining from Ottawa, but longtime Dundurn fan.
From Ottawa, hello.
Jessica, Dundas. A lot of Dundas and Hamilton area.
I like it.
Kai, I hope I'm saying that right, Kai. Norfolk County, visited Dundurn as a child many times since.
Amazing. That is also one of the very common stories is people. I love adults in their 40s, 50s, 60s being like, oh, Dundurn, I went there as a school child. So I already forget the name of whoever said that went there as a kid. Did you eat a piece of shortbread in the historic kitchen? Because that is the real Dundurn. That is the thing that everyone mentions. I went to Dundurn as a kid, maybe on a class trip, ate a piece of shortbread in the kitchen. It's like they don't remember anything about the house, just the shortbread in the kitchen. And it's like, oh, food is such a way of connecting people. And that is that memory that comes up. So it's fun.
Jessica Hatchie did. She tried the shortbread. I'm not from Hamilton originally, so I've never gone as a kid. But if there's any other moment that I can try shortbread, I'd love to.
We actually thank you for this, letting me do this shameless plug. If you follow us on Instagram or Facebook, we actually just posted the shortbread recipe for Valentine's Day weekend. So you can't come and visit Dundurn right now and eat the shortbread, but you can make the shortbread for yourself at home. And that's up on our Facebook and our Instagram. So if you check that out, yeah, you can make it. It makes an entire like cookie sheet of shortbread. I mean, like wall to wall, it is a tray of shortbread. It's not, 8 cookies spaced out nicely. It is a tray of shortbread. So just be forewarned. Share it with your neighbors. It's actually super good frozen. You can crumble up and put it on ice cream.
Sorry, Victoria, I accidentally muted you. Scrolling through the chat, and sorry about that.
No worries. I was just raving about shortbread on ice cream, so not very crucial information.
Yeah, no, but we have a few. Kai, who visited as a child, says that Kai watched your virtual tour at Christmas making the shortbread.
Amazing. Oh yes, we did the gilded shortbread at Christmas. Oh wow, that was so cool.
And Jessica says, "You mean not everyone can eat a full sheet of shortbread?"
I mean, if you put your mind to it, it is incredible what you can accomplish. But it is also an invitation for sharing.
Fiona says she can. Yeah, I think I would be able to too. But it's nice to share. We just have a few people coming in from the waiting room, and we will get started in about a minute. Thank you so much for being here again.
All right. It's considered sort of it's not an initiation, but for new staff when they join, one of the things, if you're an interpreter giving tours at Dundurn, you almost always, when your tour is done, just slip down to the kitchen and have a little piece of shortbread. And it's important that we try the food that our cooks are making so that we can interpret it and talk to visitors about it. And, somehow we need to test the shortbread every day. And it's considered a bit of a rite of passage when you no longer crave shortbread. And I've been there since 2008 and I still crave shortbread. So I guess, yeah, I'm not a fully seasoned staff yet because I still want a piece of shortbread every day.
Yeah. And so the shortbread, it's made from?
It is 3 ingredients. It is butter, sugar, and flour. And it's, I think it's 4 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar, 1 cup of butter. I feel like I can see Anna's in the chat and she might correct me on that. It's definitely on our Instagram and Facebook, and it's a super easy recipe to follow. So
I'm assuming this hashtag quality control is inside Dundurn Castle. Great. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for being here today on the final day of Seedy Saturday. It's definitely been a pleasure to hear all the knowledge from all our hosts and to have you every Saturday with us. So today, again, for those of you new joining us on Seedy Saturday, my name is Shayla and I'm 2021 Seedy Saturday coordinator. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Victoria Bick. Victoria is Dundurn Castle's historic 1.4-acre kitchen garden supervisor, a showpiece for Victorian Canadian horticulture. She is a regional leader in historic gardening and a resource for other heritage restoration projects. Today's presentations were made possible by the support of our sponsors, Ward 8 Councillor John Paul Danko, Mohawk Sustainability, Hamilton Public Library, Mount Hamilton Horticulture Society, and Fresh Start Environment. For those of you just joining in, thank you so much. I now present to you Victoria Bick.
Well, thank you for that. It is very exciting to be here in my own house presenting. It was interesting thinking this morning, looking back at the pictures from last year's Seedy Saturday, and how much fun that was, seeing everybody in person and swapping seeds and stories and connecting with so many people in the seed swap room. But it's still fun to see people's faces, even if it's on a screen, and see the sunshine in between the rain outside, and know that we'll be back together soon enough. So I'm going to jump right into this. This is the story, a little bit about Dundurn Castle and our history and the kitchen garden. So I'm going to introduce it for those of you who aren't familiar with it or haven't visited it before. But then mostly I'm going to be focusing on what happened last year. The good, the bad, the ugly, the mistakes, the lessons, the connections. So that's most of what I'm going to be digging into. I've deleted the chat box accidentally, so I'm going to save questions to the very end and get Shayla to relay them to me. So if you're frantically typing them up, she's got a wonderful volunteer who is writing them up, but I can't see them. So don't stress if you save your questions to the end. Oh, and there we go. So I want to start actually by doing a land acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about this rich history of this land so we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. And this is something that is actually really important to Dundurn. I know Aaron Altz from the RBG shared this image for their presentation, but this land, specifically here at the head of the lake, in Hamilton has been inhabited for the last 10,000 years. The oral history and the archaeological records, specifically of Burlington Heights, where Dundurn Castle is located, goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. So although today I'm primarily talking about the kitchen garden and the kitchen garden in 2020, do not think for any moment that the history is just about the 1850s that most people are so familiar with. Dundurn Castle, some of you might be familiar with those pillars that you've driven by, primarily focuses on the McNabb family. But again, that history is just a tiny, tiny slice. They were there from 1832 until 1862. So that was when the house was built and then was sold to other owners. But the history of this property includes Indigenous history, includes the fur trade, includes Richard Beasley, who was a businessman and enslaver from the 1790s. It includes the War of 1812 with Indigenous and Black people putting so much work into the landscape and the defense of what became Canada. We've got the 1837 rebellions that were involved on this site with militia, specifically the Black militia in Hamilton really stepping forward. And then we've got the 1850s, which is the peak of Sir Allan McNabb's power as a businessman and a politician. So I'm talking about 2020, but there is so much more to this story of Dundurn Castle, of Burlington Heights, and of Hamilton. So we are one of the civic museums that are owned and operated by the city of Hamilton. And so we all tell pieces of that story. And even those pieces don't even show the whole puzzle. So I hope for those of you who are from Hamilton that you dig deeper into the history of this area. And then those of you who are outside Hamilton, when it's safe, please come visit. We love sharing the stories with you. So I mentioned Sir Allan McNabb, and this is a very early image that we have of him and a part of his family. He's the guy with the great hair. He is a businessman, politician, land speculator, wheeler and dealer in early Hamilton history in the 1800s. In the house as well, we have his wife, Mary, his sister-in-law, Sophia, and we have 3 daughters actually grow up at Dundurn Castle. So we've got Sophia here, another Mary, and then another daughter named Anne Jane, who's not in this image. His wife is not in this image either. So it's an array of people and experiences. And when I talk about Dundurn Castle, that's the house, but Dundurn National Historic Site actually includes a lot more than just Dundurn Castle, that pretty pillared building that you saw at the beginning. So on this map from the 1850s, Dundurn Castle is here, and we've got tool sheds, we've got coach house over there. We have Battery Lodge, which was a military fortification from the War of 1812 that was turned into a guest house in the 1830s and is now the home of the Hamilton Military Museum. Over here, we have the cockpit, which is a weird, looks like a temple or a theater or a chapel that's on the north side of the property, the lake side. And then we have the historic kitchen garden here. And this is a Google Maps shot showing, again, Dundurn National Historic Site. So surprise, surprise, we've got the castle, we've got the tool shed, we've got the coach house, we have the Hamilton Military Museum, we've got the cockpit, and we've got the kitchen garden in the location of the original kitchen garden. So this is a 1.4, 1.5 acre recreation of the kitchen garden that was there in the 1800s. So the original garden actually extended further back into the neighborhood and was about 2.5 acres. But these fence lines, oopsies, it's not supposed to click there. These fence lines, the front circle, the water feature, the gravel paths, those are actually all based on the survey and archaeological details that we found when the garden was being restored. They actually did the work for that, the archaeology, in the 90s, and then restored the garden in 2004. And in it, we grow over 200 varieties of heirloom fruits, vegetables, flowers, and herbs. For those of you who were around for Linda Crago's talk from Tree and Twig, I think she grows over like 500 tomato varieties. I think she said something over 1,000 different heirloom varieties. That is incredible, and a diversity that we can all be astonished at. We are much more limited in that we grow varieties that are between 1832 and 1862. So that same time period that the McNabb family is living at Dundurn Castle, that is what we focus on. In this image, you can see the big long zucchini things. Those are vegetable marrow squash. We have white Vienna kohlrabi, white wonder cucumbers, yellow crookneck squash, purple calabash tomatoes, DeCiccio broccoli. We're all familiar with broccoli and tomatoes and squash, but these are varieties specific to our time period. And this is a picture of me from a few years ago. Underneath that bonnet and all the layers of fabric, there are people, and we interpret the garden. So we manage it with historic tools and methods, but our primary purpose is actually education. So we have school groups come in to learn about soil health and plants and science and insects. We do workshops and programs and tours. The garden is there to grow the things, but it's there about the stories and the people and those connections. The food that we grow, the primary purpose of it is to be used inside Dundurn Castle. So we have a historic kitchen in the basement. We were all talking about the shortbread that the historic cooks make before we got started. But we've got some very, very talented staff who use historic recipes, historic methods. They get to actually make a fire in the wood-fired range from the 19th century in the castle and cook with it. So again, we do those same workshops, school programs, demonstrations, and they oftentimes will make recipes and have them out on the table. So when you go on a tour of Dundurn, you get to sample something that they've made. We also, and it's a pity that Anna is cooking right now because I've got a picture of her in here. We also, it's lunchtime, it's good. We also do community events. So this one is one that we did in 2019 where we invited painters to come to the garden and set up their easels and just paint. And Anna actually was demonstrating historic watercolor painting and giving out paints and paper to people that walked in and inviting them to make their own paintings. So we are here for growing the food, using the food, education, entertainment, and just having a beautiful natural space to enjoy. We, again, do it mostly in costume. You can see our poor summer students on the right about to learn how to braid onions. The costumes, I think, are not their favorite part of it. For those of us who have been here for longer, like Sydney on the left, it just feels natural. Yeah, we can push a wheelbarrow and shovel manure in a dress. No worries. Aprons are a very handy thing to have, and the bonnets keep the sun off your neck. So we do it all in historic costume and with the historic tools. And so Dundurn's garden in a normal year is a beautiful, pristine, perfectly manicured, weed-free Victorian kitchen garden. So it is meant as a place to grow all of the food that is needed for the historic inhabitants of the castle, so the McNabb family and the 12 servants that lived and worked on the property. And it's also meant as a pleasure ground. So the beauty is as important as the production. And it is a place for the family to come down and enjoy. And today we have the guests of the castle, visitors get to come down and enjoy it. That was the before times. So all of that is what we used to do. 2020 changed things quite a lot for us. So our story sort of begins on March 13 of 2020. And that was the day that we got together with our staff. Normally we start our seeds in the garden in brick and wood structures called cold frames and hotbeds. They're historically accurate Victorian greenhouses. So normally we start our produce out there, but there's some rarer varieties, things that we have a harder time getting the seeds of, or finicky varieties. And we do have some grow stands inside just to ease our workload with that. And so the first day of gardening for us is the day that we all get together and do the seeding. And that was March 13th of last year. And our conversation that day was actually about if one of the staff was going to be hosting a concert in their house that day or that weekend, and was kind of worried because we were hearing about this, there's something going on. Maybe it's not a good idea. Maybe she should cancel it. That was our topic of conversation. And then the next day was when we found out that the museum was closing. And it was the day before March break. So we figured that's okay. This is gonna blow over in a week or two. We'll have the staff that are in the castle, our cleaners and maintenance people and our security people, whoever's in can water the plants. It'll be fine, they'll be fine. We thought, if we're gonna be closed for a week or two, we still actually need to do our pruning. Along one of our fence lines, we have a collection of historic apple and pear trees. And they need to be pruned in a very specific way. They're espalier trees. They're tied up and pruned so that they go against the fence instead of growing like a tree wants to grow. And we said, hey, we really still need to get in and do this. The trees don't care that we're shut. They are going to grow. The buds don't care what's going on. So we got permission to come in, and we did not know anything at that point. So we distanced, and we didn't share tools, and we hand washed and sanitized and did all the stuff that we thought would work. And we got some of our spring pruning done. And then we realized we weren't going to be coming back, and things had to change drastically. So some staff, the ones that didn't have cats, very generously took the plants home and actually grew them in their living rooms and their basements, and took these seedlings home. The rest of us, you can see myself and Sapphire were some of the gardeners. We took our work home and worked from home. So Sapphire started working on research projects for an exhibit that we were actually hoping it would have opened January 2021. And I got to work on some of the maps, and we had to endure some of our more interesting coworkers who are currently locked out of my office right now. And when it looked like this was going to be dragging on for longer, we watched as the community got involved. So for the city of Hamilton, the Emergency Operations Center took over all decisions for the city. So it wasn't about what we wanted as gardeners. It wasn't about what our curator wanted, what Heritage Resource Management, sort of our larger group in the city wanted. This was all the way up at the top. Everyone in the city was following what the Emergency Operations Center was deeming was safe or essential for us to do. But we watched as the community outside of our little historic bubble got to work in saying, you can't close gardens. Now, we're not a community garden, but we watched this with great interest because we hoped if the community gardeners fought their fight and got gardens deemed essential, that we could also go back. And so I got emails from a lot of different people, and I know some of you are in this call who were fighting to get community gardens opened. I think the argument was a lot about food security, but I think we all of us who garden recognize that it's not just about the food that you produce. It's about the community. It's about the time outside. It's about connecting with the soil and seeing things grow and blossom. And people made the argument that food is essential, but we all know that, especially after this year, that outside time and beauty and safe spaces are also essential. So we watched this, although we didn't get to be a part of it. An exception got made that myself and one other staff, Helen, we were allowed to go in because I had ordered historic roses 9 months before, and they arrived, of course, in the middle of the first lockdown. So we had to slip in and get them into the ground. And the garden just did its own thing. You can see the winter rye here is actually something that we normally plant in the fall as a cover crop. So this is part of our soil health plan is we seed winter rye, we let it germinate. It's like a blanket over the ground over the winter. I was once told that you should treat your soil like you would treat yourself, and nobody wants to be naked and outside in the winter. We all want a blanket. We all want coverings. We all want to bundle up. And so the winter rye is our attempt to give a blanket to the garden. And normally we would till it under first thing in the spring and then plant that. But there was no one to till, and the rye just did its thing, and we let it. We got to see it grow and grow and grow. Thankfully, the garlic also grew and grew and grew and was perfectly happy with its blanket of straw. We had to start canceling events. So normally one of the things that we do is we're a part of 101 Day. And that is where we separate out our historic rhubarb, also called Victoria rhubarb. It's from the 1830s, named after Queen Victoria. Normally we separate that all out and give away rhubarb plants for free for 101 Day. That wasn't going to happen. So we actually had members of the Six Nations Health Center who were starting up community gardens got in touch. And they said, hey, can you help us with our gardens? We said, no, can you help us with our garden, please? We have all of these rhubarb plants, and we were not planning on having this many rhubarb plants. So thankfully, Danielle was able to come with a pickup truck and take them all away. And Rob and Logan were able to come as well and take away all of the seedlings that we realized we weren't going to be able to grow. So in fact, a lot of those seedlings that were started in March and had been growing up in people's basements and living rooms, we realized we weren't going to get to plant them. At this point, all of our part-time staff at the museums were furloughed. So they weren't laid off, but their hours were reduced to 0. And we didn't know when that would change. And I know for all of us gardeners, the thought of wasting plants, of having to compost plants that you just started that's a crime. But thankfully they were able to come and get them. And the health center put in, I couldn't find my actual stats from them, but they put in hundreds of garden boxes in Six Nations. And some of those were decorated with flowers and herbs from our garden, which was pretty special to us to know, even when we were shut and we didn't know when we would open, that some of those plants were going on to new homes where they would be loved. And the rye kept on growing. One of the things that I was able to do was when I went in to do security checks, just checking on the garden in the castle, was spending a little bit of time harvesting some of the things that were growing in the garden. So we've had a longstanding partnership with Neighbors to Neighbor Center up on the mountain and the Hamilton Community Food Center, where we bring them fresh produce for their emergency food bank and fresh flowers for their community food programs. So this was one of our main fights, was we wanted to reopen so that we could serve them. And so I was able to do a little bit of that with rhubarb and sorrel and lovage and mint and some green onions and bring them small amounts. And we just really, really wanted to open to get back into the garden, to tame it a little bit more, to start growing food, because I think we all remember at the very beginning when layoffs were happening and the grocery stores were bare, people were scared and losing their jobs and relying more and more on supports in the community. We see the food banks were overwhelmed. The caremongering group in Hamilton started, and people were really, really passionate about making sure that we were able to come together as a community and have enough food. And then that work, those arguments, the community gardeners that were harassing their MPs, fantastic work. Gardens were declared essential. But again, we are not a community garden. We are part of a museum, and we had to obey what the Emergency Operations Center deemed important. And so mid-May, we reopened not to the public, just to a few staff. And unfortunately, our part-time gardeners were still furloughed, and they were not able to bring them back. But the good news was that you can see here, the boys are back in town, Alex and Phil. So Alex is, I want to get this right, our heritage facilities maintenance person for all of the Hamilton Civic Museums. And Philip is a historical interpreter and a collections maintenance person for the Hamilton Museum of Steam and Technology. Philip has actually been a gardener with us in the past and was there. We snuck him in for that pruning day where we all got together, and we were supposed to send our summer students to STEAM to help out with their events that summer, but that didn't happen. So we got to just borrow Phil's labor. But Alex and Phil were given permission because they were full-time employees. They were redeployed to Dundurn's garden to work 2 or 3 days a week. They both had other duties. So they were coming in with me a few days a week to see what we could do. And you can see our crude notes there. We got some tilling, we did some orientation about sanitation, and we planted potatoes. Our very first thing was plant the potatoes, and it was just in time. We save a number of varieties of heirloom potatoes each year in the basement of the castle in historically accurate Rubbermaid bins and egg cartons, yes. But they do not like being left until May to be planted. So our very, very first thing that we did was get them planted. For those of you who know about seed saving, one of the most joyous and the most stressful parts of seed saving is realizing that for some seeds, you have to plant them every year. You can't skip a year. And those were some of our arguments that we had said for allowing us to reopen. Our collection at Dundurn includes those historic apple trees, those very rare potatoes. We were growing up a nursery of 200-year-old black currants and lilac cuttings that we think have been on the property since the 1830s. We had to get in to manage all of those. And so that became our first lesson, was prioritizing. Normally in the peak of our year, we have 9 staff. So 5 part-time staff, 2 or 3 summer students, and myself full-time. This year it was Phil and Alex and I. A couple days a week. So prioritizing and picking what was the most important thing was a huge struggle that we had early on. We also decided early on, that picture of me working with the maps at my desk here, what part of that was coming up with a worst case scenario of, if we don't have staff, if we can't get into the garden, if we're not allowed to be open to the public, what do we do? And we said we were going to ignore all of our Victorian mandates about the beautiful and the pristine and the well-weeded and the historically accurate methods. We would take that and just toss it. And our main purpose was supporting the food bank. And so we decided to switch from that Victorian garden to a victory garden. So some of you have seen sort of the propaganda pictures before. These are Canadian ones from the Canadian Encyclopedia. The grow a row for victory, and soldiers holding tomatoes and saying thank you and all this. The idea that in times of national crises, one of the things that you can do to help is to grow food. And we saw this during the Great Depression. There's a lot of gardens in Hamilton in the Second World War as well. We said, forget about the pretty, we're going for production. And the Hamilton Victory Gardens is actually an organization named after this concept that grows food all over Hamilton purely to supply the food banks. So what we did was we panic planted is what I like to call it. We cut all of the varieties that were fun, that were low producers, that were for interpretation. So we said, you know what, the eggplants require too much care, they're cut. People are familiar now with the mouse melons, the little cucamelons, tiny little sour watermelon-shaped cucumbers. We grow those primarily for interpretation for children. We said, no, too much work, not enough production. So we grew about 150 tomatoes, 150 cabbages. We just grew as much kale as we could possibly find room for. And we grew it in between those rows of rye that was still there and that we did not have time to deal with. And that was also a part of the lessons that we had to learn, was recognizing our limitations, and not, well, I can't say not stressing because we stressed a lot, but looking for the opportunities and ignoring the spots that we just couldn't deal with. So one of the fun things here, Alex in the back is actually watering cucumbers. When you accept that things aren't going to change and that they're going to be a certain way and there's nothing you can do about it, sometimes there's opportunity there as well. So the rye, actually, we were trying to plant all these things with no irrigation system and no summer students to do watering. But the rye actually shaded some of the cucumbers and made sure they didn't dry out as quickly. So that was nice. We found ways as a community as well to connect. So this is one of the hard parts about the garden is we grow all sorts of beautiful perennials. And people say it's beautiful no matter when you visit. But the gates were closed. We couldn't let people in. The museums were closed. The garden was closed, no visitors. And we had all of these beautiful flowers. So Alex's and Phil's partners were gracious recipients of many flowers over the course of the early growing season. But we needed to do more than just, bring flowers for our partners. And so we had some staff come in, full-time staff, curators, our cleaners and maintenance people came in, and we harvested buckets of the peonies that were blooming, and we bundled them up and we laid them all out on the grounds of Dundurn, and we invited people to come and take bouquets. And we said, you have to take two. You got to take one for yourself and you have to take one for somebody else. We said, we don't care if you give it to a neighbor, a family member, a friend, abandon it on someone's porch. We had little baggies of water there so they could just be delivered and left. But we said, take the flowers, take them out of the garden, take them home, appreciate them, spread some joy. So we really wanted to connect. Even though the gates were closed, we wanted to connect. We had other people connect with us as well. So this is Neil from the Canadian Military Heritage Museum. It's another museum that all of their events were canceled, and they normally use straw bales as seating for their events. And they said, what are we going to do with all this? So they got in touch with us and said, hey, can we dump all this straw on you? And it was wonderful because we got to use that as mulch. Now, using straw as mulch is not a Victorian technique. They actually did not use any mulch, as far as we are aware of, in a proper kitchen garden like this. They loved bare soil, frequently tilled soil. If any of you are familiar with permaculture techniques, you know that this is not a good idea, and Victorians loved it. It looked beautiful. And we said, well, since we've abandoned our Victorian stuff this year, let's have some fun with this. We used all that straw to mulch all of the tomatoes. And we got to put a lot more emphasis on soil protection because we didn't have the staff to do any weeding or any watering. So this was partially protecting the soil and partially protecting ourselves as well. For those of you who are familiar with the garden, you know that we grow things in our beds. We grow things in 3 distinct rows. We said, forget about that. The tomatoes are going in a patch now. So this is a patch. We could fit about 75 tomatoes in a patch. And we said, putting it all together, throw the straw on there. It's good. We did have a little bit of time to cut some of that rye on our few days a week that Alex and Phil and I were in. So we cut some of it, and these are the cold frames that we normally start our seedlings in, and did not have time for that. We threw some squash seeds in. They germinated, amazing. Throw some rye on top of them as mulch. Now we don't have to water them. Go to it, little friends. Good luck. But it really showed to us that getting to be creative with some of our methods, getting to cover the soil, doing things that weren't historically accurate, the plants really liked it. And mulching in your garden is such an incredible thing that you can do for soil health, for water retention, for encouraging all of the wonderful little beasties, things that you can see and things that you can't see, that create a thriving ecosystem and do a lot of that pest management for you. We got to be creative. And this is where we kind of just tried things and tried to figure out what would work and what didn't. The one that excites me the most is getting to use the chop and drop method. You can see on the left-hand side, there's lamb's ears that's just been ripped out of the ground and thrown on the edge of a pathway. Normally, when we're weeding the Victorian garden, everything gets put in buckets and brought over to the compost bins and layered properly and turned, and it is all managed. This year we said, no, we don't have anyone to manage our compost bins. We don't have time to cart stuff back and forth across the garden. So when we ripped up weeds or errant lamb's ears, we left them in place. And it got to, again, cover the soil, protect the soil, add to the soil, and saved us a ton of work. The buckets that you can see here are paint buckets that we scrubbed all the paint that could come off them out and drilled holes in the bottom. We didn't have time to water. We were still frantically trying to get plants into the ground long after they should have been there. So we drilled some holes in the buckets, and we would go with a hose and fill up all the buckets, and it would slowly come out and soak the soil. And we'd move the buckets, fill them all, and leave it. So a little bit ugly, definitely not Victorian, but very fun. The row cover we got to use, we're normally not allowed to use that, but we got to protect some of our plants from flea beetle with that. And the one that I love the most is just trying to get into the shed. There was heaps of leaves in the way, and we didn't want to cart them to the compost bin. We didn't want to try to find a place to dump them. And so we covered the squash beds with them, the beds that were in the garden itself. So we just put, 6-8 inches of chopped up overwintered leaf around them. And then we planted in our squash mounds. We covered those with some ratty old burlap. And this actually turned into the most amazing soil that you can possibly imagine. Weed-free, moist. The robins and the birds loved these areas because there was so much to eat. So that was something that was very exciting. So normally we are perfect and pruned and pristine and colorful. We've got our blue agave that normally lives in the pots around the garden, which we overwinter in the shed every year. We did not have the time or the energy or the emotional space to try to figure out which agave goes in which pot. We said, you know what? They will survive a year in their garbage bags of soil, in some bins by the back fence. They're drought tolerant. They can handle it. They will forgive us. And so we just threw them on the ground, and every now and then went and watered them, and they just lived back there. So we had to just accept that we could not do everything. And that was okay. We had a partial recall of staff in mid-July. So staff who had been laid off, furloughed, were brought back. And this was a really difficult time because they were walking into a space that was overgrown. We hadn't weeded any paths. We hadn't weeded any borders. It was not fit to be seen, really. And we had staff coming back, and we knew we had to open in 2 weeks to the public because we finally had permission to open. So this was a really challenging time. And we didn't even have all of our staff back. It was a partial recall for the castle, the military museum, and the garden. And we could not keep up because now all of the things that we had planted Well, we done a really good job, Phil and Alex and I, and it was all coming to fruition. So this is where we reached out to our community, and we actually reached out to Neighbor Center and said, we need help. And they ended up organizing a bunch of volunteers to come and pick red currants for us to bring back to the food bank, which was amazing. Normally, for those of you who have been to the garden in the middle of the summer, you may have been handed a small French fry container and told to pick raspberries. This is one of the fun things we get to do, just to get rid of some of the extra raspberries that we have when they're producing at peak. But we couldn't do that. There was just too many things about people in the raspberry patch. So we took those containers and we filled them up and we sent them to the food bank as well. And then we got creative, because after 2 weeks of so much work, opening up paths, pruning things back, marking off spaces so that people could stay distant, we realized we were really missing the interactions with visitors. Normally we are very chatty. We stand beside people, we feed them things, we give tours, we give programs. And if you remember, when things reopened, there was a lot of, everybody needed way more space in grocery stores, at events, but seeing our families, we had to stay apart. And we wanted people to still be able to engage with the garden in really tactile, sensory ways, even though we couldn't guide them to do it. And so we used materials that we had on hand, these clay pots, and we got creative and we made a whole bunch of labels and filled them with gravel, and we just put them around the garden at all the cool spots that we thought people would want to engage with instructions about, look at this thing, feel this thing, smell this thing. Here's the cool stuff that we'd love to share with you. We can't, because we're backing away as soon as you come up to us, but please go and enjoy. Normally we have some very talented staff that make beautiful chalkboard displays where we like label fruits and vegetables and get people to taste it and look at it. No time for that. So one of our plant stands and some tape and a permanent marker. Here, these are the tomatoes. Look at them, enjoy them. They're all grown in this bed. We don't have labels on anything. Enjoy. So we got a little bit creative and cut some corners. You can actually see this, you've probably seen it in the back of some pictures, this white interpretive panel here. We don't normally have interpretation in the garden because it's meant to be a Victorian garden, and they did not have foam core signs in the 1850s. But we took all the information that we would normally share with people about our garden tours, and we put them on signs and put them around the garden. And they were just there to give people information, to answer their questions, to explain why it looked so different this year. So yeah, we had a little bit of creativity. Because we got to abandon those Victorian principles, we got to have a bit of fun as well. So companion planting is not a Victorian thing. We grow a wide range of things throughout the garden to attract beneficial insects and to create a very biodiverse environment. But that is, they would not have paired up specific plants with each other. But we had some marigolds and we had some space in our tomato row. So we put them in there. We did not record if it actually worked to deter the hornworms or anything like that, but it looked really pretty. And that was an opportunity that we don't normally get. We also really enjoyed getting to use things like tarps. This is Sapphire and Sydney collecting catnip for sale in our gift shop. And normally we'd have to, put it in the pretty baskets and in the wheelbarrow, and we're doing it all in dresses. No, knee pads, modern pruners, big white tarp. These are the silver linings for us. We got to also use some of those modern materials for succession planting. So this is a bed that had rye in it on the right-hand side. The rye was all harvested, chopped down, and we just scraped it off the planting beds. And we started some succession plantings of kale and cabbages to plant in empty beds for later crops. And we got to just start them in plastic containers, which we normally would have never done. But when we had the time, we said, we'll just seed a few flats of these and see what happens. And so we got to have later crops of things. We also expanded our garlic collection. So normally we grow just one type of heirloom garlic. And in a quiet moment, I went online and ordered a bunch of other historically accurate varieties. And so when things had calmed down in the fall, we put them in. And that's one of the beautiful things that we're looking forward to for next year. Or I guess, sorry, now it's this year. It's 2021 now, but this coming growing season, the year doesn't start till the ground thaws. So we got to take some of those opportunities, and we had a lot of fun, again, using the row cover and planting succession plants of arugula that we got to actually protect from the flea beetles. And so we had beautiful harvests of that. The rye itself, we got rid of it by, again, reaching out to community. So when it was tall and ready and the birds were telling us that it was ready and the squirrels were telling us that it was ready, we put a call out to the community and said, if anybody wants to come hand pick rye, come and have some fun. And so people came on the bottom here. They collected the seed heads for making food with, but then they actually kept the stalks for making, they were going to try to weave the stalks and make baskets from them, which was very cool. And Karen here from The Art of Doing Stuff. So she's a Dundas blogger who writes about all sorts of cool stuff. She made wreaths and bread and a few other things with it. And so people came and harvested and had some fun. And then we got to get rid of the rye, which was very key for us. We also got to take the opportunity, because we didn't have to make it pretty and we didn't have to keep it accurate. We renovated one of our beds, and we, on the top left, we just started using it as a compost dumping area for the stuff that we didn't want to just chop and drop in place. We piled up all of those extra leaves and grass and grass clippings. And then we emptied out one of our compost bins that we hadn't touched since the previous year, and then topped it all with topsoil and manure. And that was a process of a couple of weeks working on that, which normally is not acceptable for us. We need to start and finish projects and have them looking good and pretty. But we got to just be our beautiful, messy selves. It turned into a glorious new strawberry bed that we've put paths on both sides. So we were hoping for 2021 to have, school kids in the spring and be picking strawberries with them. That might not happen, but they're in the ground. The soil is going to be amazing from all that organic material that we added. And they'll be there for when we get to open up again. Like many of us, we went very online. And if you follow our Instagram, you'll know that we did a lot of Instagram stories in the summer. And on Facebook, we had garlic tutorials. So these are just two of our posts. Andrea on the left, who also did a little talk for Green Venture, did a little video for Green Venture. And then our historic cook started putting recipes online as well. So we went as online as we could. I think this is the last lesson, which was we had to be so accepting of our mistakes this year. And you probably recall those roses that I planted very early on. We planted them, we watered them, we mulched them, we went back and made sure, soil's moist enough. Okay, there's no weeds growing around them. Okay, good enough. And then towards the end of the summer, we're like, oh, they're not doing really well. And they were getting completely eaten alive. And we had just been so focused on our goal of food production that we had forgotten about some other things that needed care. And I think that's what happens when you focus very hard on one thing. And we had to be really careful as staff to not put that weight on ourselves, and to recognize that there were things that we might have messed up, mistakes that we might have made, and that was okay. And we were doing literally the best that we could. So that was a big takeaway. Those lessons that we learned about acceptance, about patience, about all of that, they're going to really impact the work that we do this coming year. And one of the things people might have noticed is that there's already chatter about it being hard to get seeds, about orders being delayed, about shipping delays, recognizing that we are a part of a community and everyone is doing the best that they can. These are things from Dam Seeds and Ontario Seed Company saying, we're trying and we hear you. But taking the patience that we had to learn last year and bringing it into this next year, even though we want to believe that this is all over and everything's fine, is a big thing. And for us, celebrating our successes is, I think, one of the big things that's going to come out of this year. So we got to open the garden. We got to welcome 5,000 visitors between when we opened at the end of July until Thanksgiving. That does not at all compare to the 13,000 visitors that we had in the garden the previous year. But we had 5,000 people come, and they got to enjoy a beautiful, safe, enriching, educational space. Those numbers don't compare to the stories that people told us about how much it meant that the garden was open for those in the neighborhood, and also people who were coming from around Hamilton and the surrounding area, just trying to get outdoors and see something. We got to do this every week. And so for all of our struggles, coming back to that key goal of we are trying to help our community, we are connecting to people, we are serving in the best way that we can, was really what got us through. And then in the end, we actually, with all of these other things, there's a reason why the roses got neglected. It's because we ended up growing over 4,000 pounds of produce, which doesn't compare to our stats from previous years, but with minimal staff, with closures, with a late start, with safety measures in place, with all of that, we grew 4,000 pounds of produce for Neighbor to Neighbor Center, which ended up being about a quarter of the fresh produce that they received from local growers last year. And that for us is, thank you, Sheila, for the little applause. Thank you. I can see you in the corner of my screen. That for us, I mean, that's everything. And that's a very proud moment, I think, for the whole team and for everyone at Dundurn that we collectively got to do this. So if you want to learn more about Hamilton's history, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook. If you've got questions, you can email me. We're getting into the growing season now, so just, calm your expectations maybe if you start emailing me in April. But yeah, you can get in touch that way. In the growing season, you will see a lot more stories on Instagram about the garden. And yeah, that's what I've got. That's the story of last year in the garden, and who knows what 2021 will look like. But we've got a pretty good game plan based on what we did last year. Sheila, do you have any questions for me?
Thank you so much. I'm just taking a moment to I'm in awe of everything that Dundurn Castle has done, for the work that has gone into with such minimal time, resources, and hands, and just gonna give a real applause to all of your work, because truly it's such a great message of resilience in the Hamilton community. So thank you. And I just want to go back to some comments that were in the chat room from Kai. I love how perky and enthusiastic Victoria is. Even over Zoom, you feel she is talking directly to you, and we definitely echo that. Another comment here that came in was from Sarah, who was also thrilled that community gardens could open. And another comment that came in from Sue H. Victoria, my 9-year-old daughter is now watching and listening with me. She wants you to know that she is really enjoying it. Hazel Cho also says her 9-year-old here too and loves this presentation. So thank you so much. And we have a few questions, as well as comments about inspiring and informative your presentation. So I'm going to read these questions.
Sure.
Do you seed share?
Yes and no. We contribute a number of seeds to Seedy Saturday every year. So we actually save certain things from the garden and package them up and bring them to Seedy Saturday. We bring any leftover seed that we know is going to be still viable from last year to Seedy Saturday. 2020 was going to be the year that we actually were going to have seeds for sale in our gift shop. That did not happen. But we do enjoy sharing seeds and even plants and plant cuttings with different organizations in Hamilton. So if there's something you're interested in, send me an email. We do our best. We don't save our own things like tomatoes or squash or beans, because we grow so many varieties in such close quarters. We're not able to ensure that they haven't crossed in any way, and we want to be growing the most accurate Victorian varieties as possible. But we have a lot of things that are possible to save and share. So just get in touch if you've got sort of a formal ask or you want to know more, just get in touch with me.
Thank you. Will Dundurn Garden be open to the public this spring and summer? If so, what events are planned?
That is the question. The museums are currently, all of the Hamilton Civic Museums are currently closed. We are waiting for direction about reopening. We hope to be open, but I don't know anything about that. For events, we're really just waiting to see what is allowed, what our mandate is, what things we can switch to digital or to small groups or to distanced. So that feels like a bit of a cop-out answer, just being like, but we're not quite sure. My hope is at the very least that the garden is open, that people are welcome to walk through and give their own tours. And anything past that would be wonderful. But it is just waiting to hear what we are allowed to do.
Will you be returning to historical planting, or will you continue to focus on production?
We're doing Victory Garden again, given that it's the end of February. And as you can tell by my previous answer, we still don't have a clear direction or know what's going to be happening or when we'll be having staff back or be allowed back on site. We're going full Victory Garden production again, which is actually exciting in a way, to get to know that we get to build on what we did last year. We left it a beautiful disaster in the fall because we just did chop and drop everything everywhere. So the ground is just covered in plant material. And the thought of having to go back to Victorian for 2021 would mean removing all of that, which is a ton of work. And instead we're planning on just making little holes and maybe not panic planting, but just planting directly into the soil, and getting to put more mulch on top means, beautiful things for our soil health and water retention. So full Victory Garden, not Victorian garden. And we'll see what happens with that.
So will you be back in costume as well?
Probably not. Staff really enjoyed a year of not being in costume. We
Anna's over there.
Yeah, and as you can see, Hannah's thumbs up. We just going to the costumes for a moment. We say, we can do everything in this and it's fine. And it keeps the sun off, and, your sweat sticks to your body and your chemises and your petticoats, and it keeps you cool and protects you from heat exhaustion. And all of that is true. And there is also a reason why most people garden in pants instead of skirts. So staff are excited to not be in costume, although it is fun, and get to use the non-historic wheelbarrows that can hold 3 times as much as the historic wheelbarrows. We are excited for not being in costume this year. Although I miss it just a little bit, but I've got a really nice long sleeve UV protecting shirt that I'm very fond of. So I'm happy to be using that and a Tilly hat instead of a bonnet this year.
Yeah. Another question that just came in: the watering buckets that were used, how big were the drilled holes and how many holes?
The holes were the smallest size drill bit that Alex had in the maintenance truck. I probably can't give that direct thing to you. We did 2 holes because we were planting our cabbages at about 12 to 18 inches apart, and we would have the bucket in there. And so we just drilled the holes across from each other so that when you put a bucket in the middle space, it went to the cabbages on either side and really only watered at their roots. So depending on what you're planting, if you're growing things in like a sort of a square, and you've got a smaller bucket, I would do 4 holes. If you've got one key plant that you want to take care of, I would just drill the 1 hole on that side and really target where you're watering. So it's gonna, I'm sorry, like most gardening questions, it depends what you're trying to do. The big tip, and we learned this the hard way, is start with your smallest drill bit and then work your way up if it doesn't do what you want it to do, because it is very difficult, although possible with lots of duct tape, to reduce the size of a hole that you've already cut. So similar to the measure twice, cut once, it's the opposite. It's drill multiple times until you get what you want, but don't just start big and then try to go smaller.
Thank you. And just one more question I'm going to take is, do you need volunteers if it's allowed?
2020 was also going to be a year that we started a volunteer program. That did not happen and probably will not happen for 2021. We did previously have, we called it Weedy Wednesday, and it was a drop-in program in the mornings on Wednesday when we did our big picks for the food bank. And so we invited people to just drop in by themselves, with kids, with family members, and help us with that and volunteer in that way. So we did have that previously, so a day a week where people could come and help us. We did have to cancel that last year, and at this point, I don't know if we'll be bringing it back for this coming year. So that's a to be determined. If we do open that up, the spot that you will see it will be on our Instagram, our Facebook, and our Dundurn Castle website. So all of our events, actually that pertains to the previous question. If we're going to have any events, you will see them on our website as well. So we'll put everything there. And if we start up Weedy Wednesday again, or if we are starting accepting volunteers, you'll see it on our social media and our website.
Wonderful. So that's it for questions, and that does conclude our session today. Thank you, Victoria, for your inspiration and all the work you continue to do for the community. Thank you all to the Dundurn staff here today as well. Thank you so much. And just as a reminder, this session was recorded and it will be available for viewing at a later time. I will send a follow-up email with these Instagram and Facebook that Victoria has provided in case you didn't write that down. And again, thank you so much for being with us through all Saturday, all February long. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.